courtship versus dating, and that is trusting God for the one person that's right for you versus shopping around trying to find the right one. Our marriage is very different from other people's marriages. Our age, our goal is to remain pure before marriage. I love her so much that I would not step over that line. I would not cross that line because I love her that much and I'm looking forward to that.
You need that information to get it because a lot of people get it too soon and they end up making choices that they regret.
Hey guys, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. It's Thursday, May 6th, and the big question of the day is Anna Duggar going to leave Josh? Did Anna Duggar hear what was said in court? Does Anna Duggar still believe Josh that it was somebody else's stuff? What does Anna Duggar believe? The internet is losing its mind right now about Josh Duggar, and many people are begging Anna to not allow him to be around his children. Yesterday in court, a judge ordered that he would be released to a third-party custodian, family friends of Jim Bob Duggar, who go to church with them. And these two individuals, Maria and LeCount, are basically going to be in charge of monitoring him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they can allow, or Anna can be around him as much as she wants and bring the kids around as much as she wants. This is the life that we're living. Now, this order came after damning testimony by HSI that went into the details about Josh Duggar's activities online, which were deeply troubling and concerning. And so people were begging Anna to leave him and to not allow the kids to see him. And I echoed that sentiment. Now, what Anna thinks and where she's going with this is kind of in another planet. So I told you last week how Josh Duggar had convinced Anna, apparently, that this content that was found on his computer was somebody else's. He had somehow convinced her that what was found on the computer was downloaded by a former coworker, and he could not name the coworker. And he also claimed that this shady ex-coworker is the person that was responsible for everything. Now, the testimony by HSI showed that at times that he was downloading on his computer and looking at images, he was also sitting at the desk taking photos of the desk, responding to or looking on a home site, leaving reviews for contractors, text messaging people, and effectively placing him in the room where these images were being downloaded. It's not direct evidence, it's what you would call circumstantial evidence. They can prove that he was sitting there taking a photo of the desk, and then they can also prove 2 minutes later at the same desk these images were being downloaded. The contents that he was downloading, HSI testified, was the top 5 worst they'd ever seen in their 1,000 cases that they've covered in over 10 years. And if you do any sort of Google searches about this content, you will end up in a world where you learn about this guy that lives in the Philippines and the depravity that went into making these videos. So what he looked at was horrible, and obviously it concerns people that Anna would allow kids around him. So apparently yesterday, the Sun spoke to a source and says that Anna has basically cut ties with the entire family. So basically what the source is saying is that Anna is in complete and utter denial about what is going on, that she's standing by Josh and she's cutting off most of the family after everything happened on with the bust. So when he surrendered himself, she got immediately angry with Jim Bob and Michelle, apparently, according to the source. They say that Anna is in denial. Jim Bob is telling people she is defending Josh and no longer speaking to most of the family. Jim Bob said she blames him and Michelle for Josh's arrest. Anna feels it all stems from how they dealt with his previous scandal after the stuff that happened with the sisters. So if you remember, Jim Bob Duggar basically claimed that when this all happened with the sisters in 2003 and 2002, he sent his son to a guy who basically did construction, and Josh was supposed to work with this guy and read the Bible, and that was supposed to rehab him. And there was no proof that this actually worked. And honestly, it sounds like Jim Bob Duggar picked LeCount Reber because he also works in ministry within the prison system and perhaps feels like he can counsel Josh and help him through this challenging time. Jim Bob's answer always seems to be finding men who claim that they can help prisoners that work in missions ministries within the prison system. Now, while God is a helpful tool, it's not the be-all, end-all, and we already know that with offenders like Josh, they cannot be reformed, typically. So Josh, she's blaming them for handling it that way, which, being that the IBLP tells people not to report things to the police and blames victims, I don't know what she would have expected the Duggars to do, because honestly, the way the Duggars handled it is pretty much how the IBLP instructs people to handle it. They're not instructed to go to law enforcement. They're instructed to handle it within the church. And that's what Jim Bob and Michelle did. So I don't know if she felt like, I can't see in any context that she would have been like, he should have been in therapy, because I don't really think that they even believe in therapy. My struggle here is like, what did she expect them to do? What did she expect them to do differently? My mind would have been like, well, you would have reported it to the police. You would have actually had him held accountable. You would have had him going through proper therapy. You would have had him seeing a licensed psychologist. You would have had him perhaps seeing a psychiatrist to see if there was anything going on with his mental health that was causing these compulsions. There could have been a variety of avenues they took, which they just did not take. None of which I think that Anna would have expected them to do. So that part of it I have a hard time with, but this next part I think is even more ridiculous. She said this. She also thinks that this case is a conspiracy theory against her husband set up by the Biden administration. She believes that if Donald Trump was still in power, this would not be happening, and refuses to believe he's done anything wrong. So I must remind Anna, if this is true what she's saying, that this investigation started actually when Donald Trump was the president. And the investigation was part of a larger program that's run by the federal government that tracks down and monitors the downloading of illegal contraband on the internet, that hashes the most deplorable content and tracks IP addresses that are downloading large files of this type of content. So this has been an ongoing federal DOJ initiative, and so this isn't necessarily led by one president, nor does President Biden, has he done anything to change this program since becoming president. The investigation started while President Trump was in power. It just so happens that his arrest happened after Biden became president. And it's more likely than not that the investigation took as long as it did because of COVID. So in the investigation, in the testimony, HSI yesterday basically said that they were alerted about these downloads in May of 2019. They couldn't pinpoint exactly like who was downloading it. They basically had an IP address, had a general location, and then by October of 2019 had a clear understanding of where it was located. And shortly thereafter, they obtained the warrant. So it took 6 months for them to even figure out between May and October who was doing this or where it was coming from. And then once they got the content, it took them even longer to do a full forensics. And then it took them even longer to do more of an investigation to try to put together a timeline that shows and indicates who the person was that was actually downloading this content. Because just because it's on someone's computer doesn't mean that that person is the person that downloaded that information. Now, their timeline was the forensic timeline was very cohesive in that Josh Duggar was sitting at his computer, and at one point he's taking a photo of his desk, and then at the next moment he is looking at these and downloading these files, meaning there would have been little to no time between this where he could have been moving, or it could have been someone else and he wouldn't have known what was going on. There were text messages where he's sending text messages which are pinged, geolocated to the exact shed that this is happening in. And at that same time, he's texting people, he's downloading these files. So while they can't conclusively say, yes, it was him because they don't have him on camera, there's enough compelling evidence that shows that could have only been him based on his own iPhone movements, along with the password of the Linux partition, along with the fact that this was designed in order to shield Anna because the other side had this program called Covenant Eyes. Long story short is Biden has nothing to do with this, but Anna and Josh and the Duggars are conspiracy theorists, and they are some of the most extreme believers, and they are some of the most off the wall in terms of what they believe about the government. They don't trust the government, and this is the part that concerns me. Listening to the judge yesterday, she asked them repeatedly, like the third party people, like, will you report this to probation before anyone else? And they kept saying yes, but in my mind I kept saying they're not going to. Like my gut was like, they're not going to do the right thing. Like they're of course going to go to Jim Bob, or they're of course going to go to their church elders because that's their chain of command. But I will note that if Josh doesn't comply with any of those conditions, and I can get those to you in a second, the judge basically said that she will tack on an additional 10 years to his sentence. So if he fails to comply with all of the release requirements in any way, shape, or form, and he ends up back with them, she will tack on an additional 10 years to his sentence when he is finally sentenced. And in this case, it doesn't seem as though it's an if, but rather a when, because of how much evidence they have against Josh. Now, it already seems like they're going to try to, the defense is trying to, like, I can already tell based on how they were arguing yesterday that they're going to try to go around the constitutionality of the search, the constitutionality of searching online and whether or not they had the proper warrants, the constitutionality of doing these covert government searches and looking online to see who's downloading things and whether or not that's a violation of your rights, which those defenses haven't proved to work very effectively. The ones that seem to work the best is where they can't determine who exactly was sitting at the computer. And the interesting thing I will note is that there was no denial by the defense that this content was found at all. The only thing that seemed to be of concern to them was the fact that when they came to do the warrant in the search, that Josh wanted to call his attorney and they took the phone, but he was not under arrest. And then the other concern of whether or not the police had the proper warrants to be doing these covert searches online where they track if IP addresses that are downloading this kind of content. Oh yes, that's really what they're doing. So long story short, Anna is pretty far gone at this point and believes it's a conspiracy, allegedly, and she is cutting people off. Now, this is actually consistent with what other people I've talked to, is that Anna, for the first several days, wasn't responding to anyone, as well as Anna's family is not responding to other people. Like, friends of her sisters have said that they've been trying to reach out to her sister and her sister's not responding. So it seems like there might be a complete cutting off of a lot of people. I don't know how this would work long term if she's going to blame Jim Bob and Michelle, but we'll have to see how this works. I mean, she's fully reliant and dependent on Jim Bob and Michelle right now, and they're basically paying for his defense. So I don't know if she's going to, she would have to physically move out if she's going to cut them off. Otherwise, and then find a different way to do his defense. Or you're believing your husband and then blaming his parents, but I blame his parents for being enablers, but I will say this: nobody but Josh was in that room, apparently. Nobody forced him to download that stuff. Nobody forced him to put a partition on his computer, allegedly. And nobody forced him to download the most graphic content that you can find online. Jim Bob was not there. He cannot be blamed for the physical choice that Josh made to do that. Jim Bob enables him, yes. Protects him, yes. Pays for his defense, yes. Found a third party for him, yes. Does that enabling contribute to Josh's escalating behavior? Yes. In a lot of ways, Josh behaves like an addict. That someone is making his life so comfortable that he can find ways to get around things, and he knows how to lie the same way an addict can lie to get to what their next hit is or whatever it is that they want, that they need to have fulfilled. And that's kind of what the prosecutor said yesterday, is that it's clear that he has such a compelling urge that has just grown more, and it has that he is attracted to children. Now, these cases are complex, and according to studies that have been done, the reason why people that download and people that possess this kind of content are charged with such heavy and severe charges with lengthy sentences is because many of these people, and it varies by study, but they say it could be up to 76% of individuals that are downloading and possessing this kind of content are also offending. So there's a strong correlation between someone that's going online, looking at it, and then offending. So we obviously were disappointed with the judge's decision, and we'll see whether or not he is able to actually stick to the actual requirements by the judge. Let me just tell you what those requirements are. So the list that she relayed in court was this: home custody with GPS monitoring, live with a third-party custodian, restricted to the home at all times except for court obligations, church, or additional locations that must be pre-approved by the probation officer, report to the probation officer, no possession or viewing of any erotica at any time, no possession of the internet and electronics, not ask or obtain passwords of the third-party custodians, contact allowed with children as long as his wife is present, possess controlled substances, no firearms, he must surrender his passport and not obtain one. The resident must not have any minor children, and if any conditions are violated, an additional prison sentence of up to 10 years may be imposed. So she's giving him a long list of things that he has to do, and if he breaks any one of them, and if his people around him are willing to lie, it's going to land him in a lot of problems. And she already said yesterday that if he's convicted on both, he's facing a minimum of 5 years on one of the charges and 20 years minimum on the other. So if you look at it this way, 25 years if he's convicted, and then if you add that, if he breaks it, he could be put in prison for 35 years. Part of me just wants him to break one of those rules because then it's more time that he can be locked up. But the other part of me wants him not to break any rules because I don't want anyone to be hurt. It's such a weird place to be. Long story short, Anna thinks the Biden administration has a conspiracy against her husband, and the Duggars are to blame for what Josh did. She is also not going to leave her husband, and I'm still wondering where CPS is and why the kids are in her care as long as she is so steadfast in her belief that Josh is innocent. I really, really hope that nothing has happened to his children. All right, you guys, tell me what your thoughts are in the comments below. Bye, guys.